This is our course. We already finished the first the course intro and Sephardic Jewry. We're now on Ethiopian Jewry, and here is our schedule. I'm just going to show you these cool pictures. All right, that's they kind of look like me, Rabbi Post, and Rabbi Wahlberg. No, just joking. But there's a lot. So that's actually, it's interesting. I'm pointing this out because it's very similar, but it's very different. So these aren't rabbis. They're called cases. Case is like they're priests, and their garb is different, and that's kind of like what we're going to be talking about, like that intersection between Ethiopian Jews and modern Israeli Jews and American Jews, and the vast difference between the communities, and like where did Ethiopian Jewry even start, and how did they end up all moving to Israel? It's like so much information. It's really fascinating. Here's some Ethiopian women, and if you notice, their hands are up. The hands are up like this, but when they pray, my friend Rabbi Shalom, he said, the hand motions are different than ours. He says when he first came to Israel, he saw people shuckling back and forth, and that took him by surprise. Like, what is this movement? In Ethiopia, this is what they used to do. They move their hands. So he says now when he prays like this. And people look at him like he's crazy. But so let's show you what we're talking about here. Okay, so that's my buddy. Okay, we're gonna talk about him. Here's his book, obviously in the left corner. So today we're gonna talk about history, culture, and custom. December 9th, which is next week, we're gonna go into the halacha. Okay, and the week after is no class. Then we're gonna go back into Yemenite Jewry. The halacha is really fascinating. So I don't know if you can see here, but so like here's his book, right? So I went through it and kind of organized it based on different colors. So I found a certain structure and different foundations in relation to the Ethiopian halacha or their customs. So I'm going to share that with you in the next class. But for now, we're going to kind of talk a little bit more broadly about the background, the history, and some really fun things. So here's I talked a little bit with you right now already about my experience and my friendship with him. I also came when I was in Israel. I had a lot of connections. I was around a lot of Ethiopian Jews. I didn't spend time in the community, but in the different yeshivas I was in, there were many Ethiopian Jews. So I got to chat with them, and that's kind of like how my connection started with them, but it was mostly through my friend. It says miracle story. So this whole story of Ethiopian Jews and how they were discovered and how they brought to Israel is a miracle. We're going to talk about that. Living Geniza. So Geniza is where you put remnants from an old, is where you put like items that need to be that you find from ancient periods that were placed there, and they kind of give you a hint. It's like you can't throw out sacred writings, so you put them in the Geniza. Now, people say about the Ethiopian community, which makes it so unique compared to the Sephardic community. So we talked about the Sephardic community in the last classes, how the Sephardic community, they kind of, their halacha is more natural, like more engaged in life. We talked about the pluses and minuses of that, but sometimes it makes it a little bit more lenient and flexible. Ethiopian Jewry, their halacha, if you want to even call it that, is based on the Bible and the Talmud. So we're going to talk about when they started, what their origins were, but at a certain point, they didn't have connections to the outside world. So their Yiddishkeit, I don't know if they call it that, their Judaism basically is Talmudic Judaism. And so they don't have a lot of things that we have. They don't have Hanukkah, because that's that's a Talmudic development. They're like biblical Judaism to the point that they don't have Hanukkah, they didn't have Purim. They were still doing the Passover offering. Okay. And there's so many interesting customs from that community that when you look from the outside in, as a Jew who's been involved, as Jews like we are, who are connected to communities that have kind of progressed with world Jewry in terms of development of halacha, you look back at this community and say, wow, they're so far behind. On the other hand, you say, wow, they're so authentic, because they're retaining these traditions from years and years ago. So we're going to talk about a lot of them this class and much more in depth next class. So let's get back to here. Okay, so we're going to talk about also like old meets new. When the Ethiopian Jews came to Eretz Israel, now they have their own challenges. We're going to talk about that, and Sephardic versus Ethiopian Jews, natural versus Talmudic, which I touched on just right now. So let's get going. Customs and terms. So again, here's what I believe perhaps what he was talking about in terms of the hands when they pray. So this is just like a custom that developed. Perhaps I don't know what the source of that is. So let's talk a little bit just about let's talk about terms. Okay. So here are some terms that are good to know. Second. Here are some terms that are good to know. You have falash, case. Case is what I talked about, the rabbi. Orit. So it's like oraita. That is what they call the Torah. And it's basically a text with 5 books of Moses, Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. And so their Torahs look like this. It kind of looks like a book. And of course, some parchment, but it's not in a scroll. This is what they were using in their communities. We have the word falasha, which is a derogatory term when it's used. That's what my friend said, and that's what's generally accepted. But it's a term that's used, and it literally means in their language, stranger. So people called them the falashas in their community because they were the Jews. But then when they came to Eretz Israel, they were still felt foreign, so they struggled with a lot of things. But they call themselves Beit Israel, which is Beit Yisrael, which is the Jews. So they believe that they believe, and their families believe, that they are direct descendants going back to the Bible, and they're Jews for all intents and purposes. Gez, that's the language in which some of their scriptures are written, and Amharic is the language that's spoken in their country. All right, so here are some interesting customs. We talked about the Pesach offering. Let's just talk. So no Hanukkah. They have their own holiday, which is the Sigd, and that's something special. You see it up here. That is, we're going to talk about that next class. But it's basically here's like a picture of it, I believe, where they count 50 days after Yom Kippur, and they renew their covenant. It's actually a national holiday now in Israel. And it's basically they would like go on top of a hill and a high mountain. And in Israel, they do it on a certain mountain now. And they basically renew their covenant to Hashem. And there's fasting. It's like their own holiday. And they brought it with them to Eretz Israel. Now Eretz Israel accepted it and kind of made it a national holiday. So here, let's talk about. I'm going to talk more about this stuff in depth. I'm just trying to show you that there's these differences in their halacha and their customs, and the main complication is when they came to Eretz Israel, they have all their customs that they've been doing for hundreds of years, and the halacha says that some of the stuff is wrong. Like for instance, my friend was sharing that Sharon Shalom, Rabbi Dr. Sharon Shalom, talked about how in their community they didn't hold by the mikvah that we go by, because they said, listen, it seems like it's a trick. If you want to you're supposed to have running water. So they say the shower is preferable to the mikvah. So now when you come to Eretz Israel and you have to go to the mikvah in order to be a kosher Jew, is it enough just to go to the shower or to take a shower, or to do it to demand the women go to the mikvah? Another example is tzedakah on Shabbat. So their communities gave tzedakah on Shabbat forever. They didn't really didn't have muksa laws. And so when communities in Israel see some of these Ethiopian communities giving tzedakah on Shabbat, they say they're transgressing the Sabbath. But the Ethiopian community would say that we have a law that anytime I'm just trying to get my. Anytime you come to God, you can't come empty-handed. You have to bring something. And so, and my friend's Professor Dr. Sharon Shalom, he talked about how when he got to Eretz Israel, he saw in some of these like Sephardic schools where they sell Anybody ever seen this where they sell the aliyot in shul? Raise your hand if you've seen that before. They sell the aliyot. So he said, I can see you now. He said, listen, we're doing it very discreetly and in a modest way, but sometimes you go to these shuls, $1,000 for the sixth aliyah, $10,000 for the, and they're selling. He's like, listen, who's observing the Sabbath in more of a respectful way, us or them? And so he's like, my friend, he had to figure out how to bridge the gap. And so it's just interesting with all these laws in this community. So let's go a little bit back into their history and their background and how they got to Eretz Yisrael and how they were discovered and everything. Let's take a look here one more time. One more thing here. We have non-Jews. So they were very careful not even to, this is like kind of intense, but you think about it, but they were careful not to touch non-Jews. And if they didn't work, they would eventually go to the mikveh and then or cleanse themselves and then be able to kind of like re-engage into the community. But so this is just a few examples of different laws. And the Pesach offering. So when they're in Eretz Yisrael, can they bring the Pesach offering now or not? They've been doing it for years. So there's all these questions that come up. So all these questions are kind of due to the main question at hand is, are the Ethiopian Jews, are they Jews? Like, who are they? Where do they come from? How did they get to Ethiopia? And how are they if they're so different than Jews that we know of in our countries, how do we explain their origins? So there are many different theories when it comes to it. Here are a few of them. A number of theories. This is from this Rabbi Shalom's book. So he says, I'll just read a few of them to you. A legend among Ethiopian Jewry relates that the marriage of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba produced a son named Menelik. When the Queen of Sheba returned to her country with the boy, the king decided to send the firstborn sons of Israel to accompany her. When they arrived in Sheba, her escorts decided to remain there. According to this legend, the Ethiopian Jews are indeed Jews. So the Jews came to escort Queen Sheba all the way from biblical times, and they ended up staying there, and they became the Ethiopian Jews. The academic approach that's often accepted today is that there were Christians that converted to Judaism many, many years ago in Ethiopia, and those are the Ethiopian Jews. But we'll see that halacha doesn't say that, which is really interesting. So Ethiopian Jews are descendants of the tribe of Dan. This is the accepted halachic view today, actually, and this is how we're going to see who is responsible for really pushing this forward. But number two is Ethiopian Jews are descendants of the tribe of Dan, the 10 lost tribes. So there are 10 lost tribes in biblical times, and one of them, a whole tribe, moved to Ethiopia in 10th century BCE, right? That's a long time ago. And then, and this is the tribe of Dan. This is the lost tribe of Dan. If that's the case, then they're more Jewish than a lot of us, So Ethiopian Jews are the descendants of Jews. Well, I don't know, more Jewish, but they're bona fide Jews for all intents and purposes. Ethiopian Jews are the descendants of Jews who emigrated from Egypt from the 7th century BC to the 2nd century CE. All these are like academic views and stuff. Ethiopian Jews are descended from Jews who emigrated from Southern Arabia between the 2nd century and the war between Ethiopian Christian king, etc. Fifth, Ethiopian Jews are descendants of the tribe which converted or adopted a unique form of Judaism. Okay, so I just presented a few different theories, and also the theory that they were Christians who converted. So here's just a source from Isaiah. Prophet Isaiah spoke of the return of the Jews who have been exiled to a variety of lands, including Cush, right, which is now part of Ethiopia. Isaiah and the Sudan. Isaiah 18 is devoted to a description of Cush and the people living there. So my friend Sharon Shalom often says, people talk about Ethiopian Jews and like where they come from and what their story, and he says, why don't people ever ask that about Jews from Poland? He says, listen, if you go through the Bible, the word Cush appears like dozens of times. He says, how many times does Pauline appear in the Bible? That's what he says. So from here, he says that there's definitely, and Ethiopians connect themselves to Cush. So there are many sources which kind of go over this, but I'm just showing you a map here. Showing you a map here of the area, and so how the path could have been made from Eretz Yisrael down to Egypt, Sudan, or through the Red Sea to Ethiopia. All right, I see a chat coming in. Let me see what that is. My understanding is that those Ethiopian Jews who claim Kohen lineage do have the Kohen model in their genome. Okay. That's really interesting. I didn't know that. Thanks, Mark. So he says that they have in their genes kind of like evidence for the fact that they are the Kohen. They have Kohen lineage. Interesting. Alan says aliyahs were also auctioned off loudly when I was a kid in the shuls on lower park heights. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, it's a common thing. All right. So let's go back here. So a little bit about the origins. Now, here's a little bit of the timeline. And I just wanted to, let's just jump straight into Rav Ovadia Yosef, okay? And then we'll go back a little bit on how they all arrived into Eretz Israel. But this is the most, this is the most pivotal moment for Ethiopian Jews when it came to being able to be integrated into Israeli Jewry. So here's a picture of Rav Yitzchak Yosef, the current chief rabbi of Israel. We talked to Rav Ovadia Yosef last class. He's the current chief rabbi of Israel. And here are its Ethiopian community. They've translated Rav Ovadia Yosef's works to the Ethiopian language. And this is kind of like them meeting with Rav Yitzchak Yosef, his son, to kind of like in talks about that. Here is the most influential psak when it comes to the Ethiopians. Rav Ovadia Yosef in 1973 took the whole Ethiopian community on his shoulders. Baruch Hashem, Rav Ovadia Yosef, let me just remind you something about him. We talked about some of his accomplishments and some of his amazing things that he did. So one of the things that he did was he took the whole Ethiopian community on his shoulders. Nobody was willing to do that before him. And he poskined that they were Jews, and he adopted the view that they are from the tribe of Dan. Okay, he adopted that view. He didn't start it. It started from the Reed Baz. I'm just going to read you what he wrote, and he was a 16th century figure. He says like this. He says, but those who come from the land of, this is the Reed Baz from the 16th century. He says there, and this is Rav Ovadia Yosef went by him. He says they're the accursed group that they're, okay. But those who come from the land of Cush are undoubtedly from the tribe of Dan. And because there were no sages among them who received the oral law, they followed the simple meaning of the texts. They did the Passover offering. If they had studied the oral law, then they would not have denied the decrees of our rabbis. They are like captured infants who live among idol worshippers. So that was the Reed Baz. And Rav Ovadia Yosef went by the Reed Baz, and he made space for Ethiopian Jewries to be able to be accepted in Eretz Israel, and his halacha became Israeli law. And you know how there's intertwined the law and Jewish law and secular law there, and it enabled them to be able to enable the Israeli government to be able to push forward to bringing them to Eretz Israel. Here's just one of the missions, and we're going to talk about Operation Moses, Solomon, and others. But let's just show you a little bit what Rav Ovadia Yosef said. So here's Rav Ovadia Yosef's psak. Therefore, I've come to the conclusion that the Falashas are the descendants of the Israelite tribes who wandered south to Ethiopia. And I too have investigated and researched carefully in this matter. I decided to save them from impurity and assimilation, to hasten their up to Israel, to educate them in the spirit of our holy Torah and include them in the rebuilding of our land. The children shall return within their borders. It's so beautiful. Now, Rav Ovadia Yosef, from what I understand, he suggested that they would convert also just to be extra stringent, but it wasn't because he doubted their Yiddishkeit. He said it was a way for them to strengthen their covenant. And when my friend, Professor Shalom, Rabbi Shalom, I was going to call him Rabbi Shalom, when he came to Israel, we're going to learn his story a little bit. I want to make sure I make some time for his story. It's amazing, amazing story. I want to bring him to Beth Tfiloh. I think you're going to love him. It's funny. He's got this. When you hear his story, I think you're like jaws are going to drop. It's an amazing story. So I'm going to share that with you in like 10 minutes or so. But so when he came to Eretz Israel, he also chatted with one of my rabbis. He went to the same yeshiva as mine, Yeshivat Har Etzion, and Amital, if anybody's heard of him before. He said to him, he said, Rabbi Shalom said, listen, I'm Jewish. How do I know I'm Jewish? My grandfather told me I'm Jewish. His grandfather. It goes back, man, hundreds and hundreds of years. I'm Jewish, so why does our community have to convert? He says we have, meaning what does it mean convert? Like they have to, if they're already circumcised, they have to have some sort of process called a hatafat dam, which is like a procedural procedure, which is pretty simple. And also they have to go in the mikveh and announce their commitment to Judaism. He says, listen, this is an embarrassment. We have cases, 80, 90-year-old rabbis who are leaders of our community. They have to come to Eretz Yisrael. They have to convert to prove that they're Jewish. He says, this is an embarrassment. But he said, Rabbi Amital says, we believe that you're Jewish, but it's better sometimes to be clever than right. He says, we want to enable you and your community to integrate into society. And some people have doubts. He says, this is the path that's suggested. And that's kind of like the path that they take. But in terms of the view of halacha, the accepted halacha based on Rav Ovadia Yosef is that these are Jews. Now, can they prove to you that they're from the tribe of Dan? I don't know. Can I prove that our parents or our ancestors, our lineage goes all the way back? Halacha is halacha, and there's a concept of a chazaka, and that's what I'm going to share with you here. This idea of like that something is in place, and because it's been in place for years, and that becomes the established law. So this is kind of what another one of my rabbis talks about here in this text. This is Rabbi Chaim Jachter. So he says here, he talks about, this is an article of his, says, which ruling of Chacham Ovadia had the most impact? It would seem that his ruling is in which he forcefully asserted the Jews in Ethiopia were indeed Jews in the full sense. There are some more than 100,000 Ethiopian Jews who currently reside in Israel as a direct consequence. Imagine this, beautiful. Chacham Ovadia's 1973 ruling. Rav Yosef's great ruling enabled these many Jews to obtain automatic Israeli citizenship under Israel's law of return, which guarantees Israel's citizenship to any Jew who requests sanctity. So here he goes into like the different arguments against it. Let me just show you one of them. One might question the stability. So he says, one might question the stability of the cheskat kashrut of the Ethiopian Jewish community, since 500 years have passed since the Rabaz and the Marikash issued their rulings. Chacham Ovadia dismisses this concern, knowing that Ethiopian Jews zealously guarded their Jewish identity throughout the generations, even going to the extreme of requiring community members who even spoke to Nochrim Gentiles to immerse in a river. So he says about his community, a congregation, Sharei Orah, the Sephardic congregation of Tina, he's actually an Ashkenazic rabbi in the Sephardic community. We regard Ethiopian Jews as full-fledged Jews in accordance with Chacham Ovadia's landmark ruling. They're given aliyot without questioning whether they underwent a conversion or ceremony after their arrival in Israel. This is one of the many ways which Chacham Ovadia's rulings make such a deep impact on our Kal Kadosh, along with the rest of Am Yisrael. So he says here also, here, I'm just going back here, it says, Chacham Ovadia roundly rejects this view, noting that once a chazaka, a lack of presumption, has been established of a Jewish identity, we enjoy no right to disturb this chazaka based on sources extraneous to the halachic process. He says, if you bring me scientific views that seem to question this, he says, we have halachic precedent. Chacham Ovadia elsewhere argues that whenever there is a clash between scientists and traditional halacha, the halacha unquestionably prevails. Some of you might raise an eyebrow to that, but in this case, I think it's helpful in the sense that halacha established that they're Jewish, so we go by that. So here's, let's talk a little bit about the history or the Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. And this kind of brings us to our source sheet. So I'm going to project that on the screen here. If you have a source sheet in hand, please access that. Okay. So I'm doing this on a Google Doc, so it's a little bit like hard to read. All right. So I kind of highlighted on this timeline the main things I want to focus on, but there's obviously a lot of information there, so you can check that out. Again, we talk about the 16th century. Rabbi Zimra, which is the Rabaz, issues a legal response. Confirms him as fully Jewish. 1769, Scottish explorer James Bruce awakens the Western world, the existence of the Ethiopian Jews in his travels. So he travels to this far-off country and realizes that there's this whole community of people who are practicing Judaism, and he spreads the word, and people start to take a little bit of interest, but it didn't really catch on until years later, this interest and also activism on their behalf. 1867, Professor Joseph Halevi is the first European Jew to visit the Beit Israel, constantly becoming an advocate for the community. So I believe I believe I have like a quote of his, which I think is really interesting. Let me just see if I do. 1 second. I don't. Okay. So anyway, he shares that when he came to the Ethiopian community, he was surprised to see that there were Jews of a different color. And you know what? When they saw him, they were surprised at the same thing. They didn't know that there were white Jews or pale skinned Jews. And they thought he was like a falash. They thought he was like a foreigner. And he says he had he had a lot of difficulty in explaining that he was Jewish to them too. And so he says he finally was able to make the connection when he said that he had connections to Jerusalem. When he said he had connections to Jerusalem, their eyes opened up. Because for them, we're going to hear the story with Professor Rabbi Shalom. He says Jerusalem was like heaven. It was like what they all wished for. They read about in their books. It was kind of like, if you're biblical Jews and you're not just Talmudic Jews, you're biblical Jews, Talmudic biblical Jews. You're thinking about Eretz Yisrael all the time because the Bible's all about that. So when they heard about Jerusalem, their eyes lit up, and then they were able to accept him. And he kind of like he was able to bring more exposure to the community. And his student, that was 1904. His student is also a big name to know. Feitlevich, a student of Professor Joseph Lee, makes his first trip to Ethiopia to visit the Beit Yisrael. 1904. Okay. He commits his life on their behalf and actively tries to reconnect the community with the rest of the world Jewry. He establishes the first pro-Falasha communities in the United States, etc. Takes the first Ethiopian Jewish students to Europe and Israel to increase their Jewish education. Okay, so in 1908, rabbis in 44 countries proclaimed Ethiopian Jews to be authentic Jews. But that was a stage, but they didn't do anything on their behalf. Now, why do you think something on the Ethiopian Jews' behalf? Maybe like we shouldn't interfere. They're living their Jewish life, and that's fine. At a certain point, there was the government was very oppressive to the Ethiopian Jews, and the Jewish nation, the Jewish government in Israel, Israeli government saw it as their obligation to intervene and help the Ethiopian Jews. So we're going to see when that happened. Let's see what another important landmark. Okay. 1961, Ethiopia and Israel begin full diplomatic relations. 1973, okay. Rabbis stayed away from this until Rabbi Ovadia Yosef stepped in. He follows the rabbis at the Beit Israel are from the tribe of Dan and confirms the Jewish identity of the community. Okay. Now, this is important. In 1970, we're going to move forward. Okay, so in 1975, his counterpart, Rabbi Shalom Goren, who disagreed with him earlier, came around, and he agrees with the 1973 opinion of Rabbi Yosef. Interior Minister Shlomo Hillel signs an ordinance to accept all Ethiopian Jews officially under the Israeli law of return. They're granted full citizenship and receive the full rights given to new immigrants. So the first movement started in 1976. 250 Ethiopian Jews are living in Israel. Well, at that point, there were 250 Jews living in Israel. 1984, approximately 8,000 Ethiopian Jews were brought by most from 1981 to 84 as part of Operation Brothers. So I'll share something about that. Until that time, a lot of Ethiopian Jews were and my friend, Rabbi Shalom, they were trying to make their way through Sudan and then to Israel in some way. And the Israeli government didn't have any big operations in place, but they wanted to figure out how to get the Ethiopian Jews to Israel. So at a certain point, they opened up a resort in Sudan with the help of this important businessman, opened up a resort pretending a full tourist resort in Sudan. This is through the Assad. And through that, they were able to smuggle Ethiopian Jews from Sudan to Eretz Yisrael in this covert mission. Eventually, the government called Sudan. The word got out, it leaked, and the Sudan government had to shut it down because they're part of like the Arab League there. But there were all these kind of like makeshift or like covert missions. And then the first big mission was Operation Moses, and that was in 1984. The massive airlift known as Operation Moses begins on November 18th and ends on January 5th. During this, some 6,500 Ethiopian Jews are flown from Sudan to Israel. Okay? Attempts are made to keep the rescue effort secret, but public disclosure forces an abrupt end. So the Sudan government was involved in these top secret negotiations, allowing for this to happen with America and Israel. Once the word got out, they had to shut it down because it made them look bad and endangered them. But in the end, an estimated 2,000 Jews died en route to Sudan or in Sudanese refugee camps. Okay, I see a check about. So let's move forward to 1991. This is Operation Solomon. Okay, this is a very important operation. This is an amazing. If you have time to, I'll send a link to this. If you have time to check this out on Google, on YouTube, there's this amazing operation. It all happened in 36 hours. And so 34 El Al jets, one of them filled with over 1,000 people. It was like a world record or something. They cleared out some of the biggest planes. They didn't have any. They were able to fill that many people in the airplane because they didn't have any luggage. People just rushed out of their house in 36 hours. All these factors fell into place where Israel was able to do this. And there's one more picture of that here. Okay, so apparently 7 babies were born en route to Israel. Okay, so imagine that. Here's just a little bit of information of like the timeline. Moses 6,720, Operation Moses, Joshua, Solomon, immigrants. So here's just like a list of how many Jews came from Ethiopia to Israel over the years, and it's still going on. We're going to talk about that. The last part of our program. See, if you see here, we talk about origins, timeline, Shulchan Aruch, which is going to be the halacha next week. And the last section of this unit is going to be what's next. Okay, and that's going to talk about like Ethiopian Jews today. So at the end of next class, Ethiopian Jews today, what the struggles are, what the goals are at that time. Okay, so let me share with you Professor Rabbi Shalom's story. I'm basically just reading from the source sheet, but it's written beautifully, this story, and it really highlights central pieces of this whole reality of Ethiopians moving to Israel, the struggles they went through, and this tension between trying to retain the old and trying to figure out who they are in relation to themselves, in relation to the surrounding community. Because my Ethiopian name is Zada Tesfaye, I guess how you pronounce it. And today I'm known as Sharon. This is page 4 in the source sheet. I'm known as Sharon Zada Shalom. I first heard of Eretz Yisrael when I was a small child in a village in Ethiopia, where I helped herd the sheep. So he was a sheep herder. When I asked where Jerusalem was, my grandfather pointed in the direction of the city for which we earned. Okay. When I was only 8 years old, I came to Israel by myself with my aunt and uncle. I was certain that my parents were dead. And I went to live as an orphan in a children's home in Afula. As a child in Ethiopia, I thought that Jerusalem was made of gold. I dreamed of a land of milk and honey in which everyone was Jewish and the Gentiles did not hate them. In the village, we continued dreaming of Jerusalem. Rumors began to fly around our village and others that Jews from Jerusalem had come to Sudan in order to help the Ethiopian Jews, the Beta Israel community, to go to Israel. The gates were open. Whoever wanted to leave could go ahead. None of the villagers thought of waiting. They all did everything possible to organize and start moving in order to go up to Jerusalem. Every item that could be sold, we sold. Whatever we couldn't sell, we left behind in our clay huts. After 2,000 years, we began to internalize the idea that the road to Jerusalem was open. One night, when the sign to begin the journey was given, the residents of several villages gathered at a meeting point and began the trek to Jerusalem. A friend shares that one time his grandfather told him, like, I don't know if he shares about this here. He says, my grandfather told me the direction, he pointed to the direction to Jerusalem. He says, I love Jerusalem so much that me and I think his family member of his, they tried to trek to Jerusalem on their own. Because he says it's that direction. They wanted to get there so badly. He has an interconnection to Eretz Yisrael so deep that he says he got to a certain point and I think he for days, something like that. He ended up finding him and helping him get back home. But it just shows the innocence and this longing for Israel. Our hasty departure led to complications. In my family, we kept our donkeys, so sometimes we rode, but most of the group journeyed on foot. We walked for 2 months from Ethiopia to Sudan, exposed to the dangers of the road. People were certain they would reach Jerusalem within a short time, but in reality, some of them were forced to wait in the Tfiloh refugee camp in Sudan for as long as 6 years. So there was rumor that if you get to Sudan, Israel would be able to help you get there, the government. But at that time, it was very risky to get to Sudan. And when you got to Sudan, it was dangerous. This was before those missions that we're talking about. Path to this situation, he says, conditions in the camp were harsh. It was overcrowded. Sanitary conditions were deplorable. The path from this situation to outbreaks of infectious diseases was short. Thousands died of disease. In consideration of this situation, the Mossad and the Jewish Agency Aliyah representatives did their best to help the interned Ethiopian Jews. They worked to improve conditions and sped up the stream of Aliyah, all the while operating under stressful conditions and a heavy pall of secrecy and fear. On the one hand, they tried to push up the pace of Aliyah, while on the other hand, they had to be careful not to arouse the attention of the soldiers of the president of Sudan. I'm not pronouncing that. My family was in the camp, and we were told we would have to wait for 2 or 3 years for our turn. So they left Ethiopia. They went to Sudan, waiting in the camp in deplorable conditions. Now, they were waiting their turn. The mortality rate among children in the camp was particularly high. So some of the parents decided to send their children ahead of them to Israel to try to save their lives. I was the eldest child in my family. At 8 years old, I was told to go with my aunt and uncle to Jerusalem. I was torn between my love for my family and my love for Jerusalem. I followed my parents' wishes. Along with hundreds of other children, adults, and elderly, I was packed into a crowded truck. The bed of the truck was covered with a heavy tarp, and we were off. This is Israel saving Jews from Sudan, trying to bring them from Ethiopia to Sudan, trying to bring them to Israel. Conditions inside the truck were foul. It was terribly crowded and hot. People vomited, and the smell was unbearable. No one dared to make a sound. This is like a story from a movie, and it's amazing how he survived all this and also came out super positive. He's one of the more positive people that you can hear. He's very upbeat, and he has a positive message all the time. So no one dared to make a sound. Even the children and babies were silent, as if they also realized they had to keep silent, or else put all of our lives at risk. We didn't know where they were taking us or how much longer we would have to travel in this horrific state. Finally, the truck stopped, and we heard a powerful racket outside. The tarp was lifted from the truck bed, and we climbed out. The roar intensified. I had no idea what it was. Then I saw an amazing sight, something I'd never seen before. I saw water, more and more water that erupted and writhed fearfully. This was the shore of the Red Sea, my first glimpse of the ocean. It looked like a wild beast that hadn't been fed for weeks, and it moved toward us, jaws open, from inside a cage that confined it. I can hardly describe my fear at the sight of the powerful waves pounding toward me. I didn't know they would stop the moment they reached the shore. Then suddenly a miracle happened. From out of this nowhere, from deep within the darkness and the fog, the tumult and the confusion, commandos from Unit 13 of the Israeli Navy rose up out of the sea. They shed tears, and we cried along with them. It was a meeting of two brothers who had been separated for 2,000 years. Yes, this is just the beginning of this story. It's amazing. I hope I have enough time to share this with you. All right, it's kind of long, so let me just see. I'm just going to keep reading. Well, I think I'll be able to get this done in 5 minutes. Let me just see if you can give me a thumbs up. You have 5 minutes? Give a thumbs up if you have 5 minutes. All right, cool. Let's do it. All right. Soldiers loaded us onto rubber boats. It was a dark night. The boats floated silently into the sea. After a while, the boat reached what I thought was a large, well-lit building, an Israeli naval ship. The boat passengers climbed up through the belly of the boat onto the high deck. Some of them kissed the deck, convinced they had arrived in Jerusalem. I'm skipping the next paragraph. In January 1982, I stood in front of an immigration ministry clerk at Ben Gurion Airport. Through a translator, I was asked my name and my age, but I was at a loss for words. 2 years previously, I had acted without a word. Here again, I had lost the power of speech. I barely managed to pronounce my name in a whisper. For over 2,000 years, our people recited the prayer, "May our eyes behold your return to Zion in mercy." After an absence of 2,500 years, the Ethiopian Jewish community had merited the return to our homeland. We have returned to our home. This is why when I stood before the immigration ministry clerk at the airport and was asked my name and age, my throat was choked and I could barely utter my name. I went to live in a children's home in Afula. At one point, I received the bitter news that my parents are no longer alive. So imagine that. His parents are no longer alive. For 2 years, I lived with the knowledge that I would continue in this world without my family. This is the struggles that Ethiopian Jews went through. Part of the family made it to Israel. Others were left behind. There was no lines of communications either. The Emunah Children's Center, for 2 years, I lived without the knowledge that I would continue in the world without my family. The Emunah Children's Center provided for all my needs. My aunt and uncle, Utula and Tedu, to say, whom I did not know in Ethiopia became my family. Then one day, the children's center director, Baruch Bazin, called me to his office urgently. I went in and sat down cautiously, petrified I had done something wrong. Then he told me that the news I had received 2 years earlier about my parents' death had been a mistake. My entire family was alive. And the night before, they had made Aliyah in a major IDF operation. Which one? The one we talked about, Operation Moses. Okay. I took a shower, put on my new clothes, and went for the meeting. So I'm checking the bottom of that paragraph. We embraced and wept, and I felt that I was experiencing the miracle of the resurrection. Okay. So here, this is an important part. Okay. He's depicting a little bit of his. Now, once they made it to Israel, their struggles didn't stop. That's where it kind of started, actually, to some extent, because now they had to try to figure out who they were. In Ethiopia, it was clear they were Jews. In Eretz Israel, their skin color was different. People were doubting their Judaism. It says, when I arrived in Israel, there were very few Ethiopian Jews in the country, and I felt foreign and strange. I had the constant feeling that people were looking at me, thinking I was a character who had come about a popular Israeli children's book. The little black boy goes to kindergarten. I felt different, foreign. I remember that feeling of otherness from when I was still in Ethiopia, from the other side of the coin. When a representative of the Jewish agency came to our village, we considered him a Fereji, a foreigner. Still, we desperately wanted to meet him because he was a Jew who came from Jerusalem. Israel was difficult for me to reconcile the difference between the dream of Jerusalem and the reality, but I know it was harder for the adults than it was for me, a child. So I'm just moving around a little bit. Okay, so the story keeps going on, but let's skip to the very end of the story. Feel free to kind of like fill in the blanks here. It's an amazing story, but here he talks in the final paragraph on page 7. Today I have a PhD, and the story goes on, but today about his struggles and his like search for search for self and how he views himself in relation to his external reality. Today I have a PhD in Jewish philosophy from Bar-Ilan University, where I teach courses titled Culture, Halacha, and Tradition in the Ethiopian Community, Intolerance and Pluralism in Jewish Sources. I'm also a lecturer at Tel Aviv University in the African Studies Department. I also serve as a rabbi. He serves as a rabbi in actually an Ashkenazi community. I'm reading the final sentence. After over 2,000 years of exile and wanderings, we are proud to live in Kiryat Gat in the Holy Land. It is truly a miracle of the revival of the Jewish people, and a sign that the redemption will soon be coming. Okay, so this is just a little. This is like one story from Ethiopian Jewry. There are so many of them, and we're going to learn next week how Rabbi Shalom is trying to help others going through these same struggles integrate into society, to retain the beauty of their tradition, but still to find a way to feel safe and at home, and also part of the halachic community. And that's kind of like some of the struggles they're going through and what he addresses in this book. So we're going to go through this next week. All right, everybody. Beautiful day. Thanks for joining us.